Every December, the small cul-de-sac of Maple Crest Court transformed into a quiet postcard scene. Neatly trimmed hedges, pristine driveways, and rows of identical houses draped in simple, polite Christmas decor. It was a place where conformity wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. The Homeowners Association took pride in maintaining uniform elegance, as the annual newsletter liked to phrase it. No inflatable Santas, no flashing lights, and absolutely no gaudy excess. For years, most residents complied, hanging modest white icicle lights and wreaths that matched the HOA's approved Winter Harmony palette. But this year, one man decided to do things differently. Ethan Parker had recently moved into the neighborhood with his wife and 2 kids, excited for their first Christmas in a new home. He loved the holidays, not just for the presents or the food, but for the magic of it. As a child, he'd spent every December helping his late father decorate their house from roof to driveway, stringing lights until the place looked like it had been lifted from a Christmas movie. It wasn't just tradition, it was legacy. So when December rolled around, Ethan wasted no time. He spent weekends climbing ladders, measuring outlines, and unpacking hundreds of carefully stored lights. Red, green, gold, every color imaginable. The lawns soon filled with reindeer, snowmen, and a giant inflatable Santa waving from the roof. His kids helped string garlands and stake candy canes along the walkway. It was cheerful, over the top, and full of heart. But to the HOA, it was chaos. The first complaint arrived just 2 days after he plugged in the display. A neatly folded letter taped to his door, written in formal HOA language. Your decorations exceed the acceptable limit for exterior illumination and may disrupt the community aesthetic. Please remove or modify immediately to comply with Section 14B. Ethan laughed it off at first, assuming it was a misunderstanding. His lights weren't even synchronized or musical yet. Still, he didn't take anything down. If anything, he added a few more twinkling strands around the porch railing. But then came the second letter, this one more urgent, warning of potential fines and further action. By the third letter, the tone had turned downright hostile. The HOA claimed his lights were a safety hazard, citing potential glare to drivers and disturbance of neighborhood tranquility. The fines began accumulating, $50, then $100, then $250. Each notice came with photos of his house taken from the street, as if they were documenting a crime scene. Still, Ethan refused to back down. He'd read the HOA rules cover to cover, and nowhere did it specifically ban Christmas decorations beyond a certain brightness. The rules mentioned tasteful lighting displays, but offered no measurable limit. So he decided to test the limits of tasteful. If they wanted polite, he would give them spectacular. The next weekend, he doubled the number of lights. He installed programmable LED strips that danced in patterns, outlining the windows and roofline in synchronized motion. A glowing Merry Christmas banner stretched across the garage, pulsing softly to the rhythm of holiday music that played through hidden outdoor speakers. By the following week, Ethan's house had become a local attraction. Cars began slowing down at night just to watch. Families took photos from across the street. Kids pointed in awe as the colors shimmered and changed, the yard transforming into a winter wonderland of lights and laughter. The HOA, however, was not amused. One morning, Ethan woke to find an official notice stapled to his mailbox. Immediate removal required. Final warning before legal action. It was signed personally by the HOA president, a woman named Carol Benson, known in the neighborhood for her strict enforcement of every bylaw, no matter how trivial. Carol had ruled the HOA for nearly a decade, her word practically law. She prided herself on order and appearance. To her, Ethan's display wasn't festive, it was rebellion. And rebellion could not be tolerated. Over the next few days, she sent inspectors to photograph the property, measure light intensity, and even question neighbors about noise complaints. Some residents sided with her, grumbling that the lights were too much, while others secretly admired Ethan's boldness. The cul-de-sac was divided, those who feared the HOA and those who silently cheered for the man standing up to it. As Christmas approached, tension filled the air thicker than tinsel. Ethan could feel the stares from Carol's house every evening as his lights came alive in a glittering spectacle. The HOA fines continued, now totaling over $1,000. But instead of backing down, Ethan began planning something even bigger. He remembered his father's final Christmas, the year they'd gone all out, creating a light show that could be seen from 3 streets away. That memory fueled him. He wasn't doing this just to defy the HOA anymore. He was doing it for that same joy, that same magic. So, in the quiet nights leading up to Christmas Eve, Ethan began his secret project. He bought extra lights, more extension cords, a digital controller system, the kind used in professional displays. He mapped out patterns, tested sequences, and built what he called Operation Griswold. Named after Clark Griswold, the legendary over-decorator from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, it would be the biggest, brightest, and boldest Christmas light display the HOA had ever seen. He worked late into the night, the soft hum of Christmas music keeping him company. The front yard slowly transformed into a glowing canvas of holiday spirit. Trees wrapped in spiraling lights, roof lines sparkling like diamonds, and a synchronized sequence that could dance to any song. He knew the risk. He knew the HOA would lose its mind. But he also knew this. You can't find someone for spreading joy. Not forever. By Christmas Eve, everything was ready. The system was wired, the sequences timed perfectly, and the power cords connected. The house stood quiet under a blanket of snow, the lights waiting in darkness. Across the street, Carol Benson's window flickered with the faint glow of her TV. Ethan looked at the switch, heart pounding with anticipation. He wasn't just flipping on a light show, he was making a statement. And when he finally did, the night exploded in color. Thousands of bulbs illuminated at once, choreographed to the triumphant notes of Carol of the Bells. The snow reflected every hue, turning the cul-de-sac into a shimmering spectacle of color and sound. It was breathtaking, overwhelming, unapologetically bright, a defiant masterpiece of holiday cheer. For a moment, everything was perfect. Cars began lining up at the entrance of Maple Crest Court. Neighbors stepped outside in amazement, and children gasped in awe. Ethan smiled, feeling his father's spirit there with him, glowing in every light. But from across the street, behind the glare of all that beauty, Carol Benson was already on the phone. Her expression was stone cold, her voice sharp and urgent. The war was about to begin. The next morning, Maple Crest Court was alive with whispers. Word of Ethan's dazzling display had spread like wildfire. Cars lingered along the cul-de-sac, neighbors lingered on porches, and some even took photos to share with friends and family. The lights had become more than decoration. They were a symbol, a spark of rebellion against an HOA that had long ruled with an iron fist disguised as holiday cheer. Inside the HOA president's house, Carol Benson seethed. She had anticipated some minor pushback, but nothing like this. The sheer scale of Ethan's display was audacious, far beyond anything the community had ever allowed. It wasn't tasteful, it wasn't orderly, and in Carol's eyes, it was a direct affront to her authority. By mid-morning, the HOA board had convened an emergency virtual meeting. Their agenda was clear. Ethan Parker had to be stopped. They reviewed photographs sent by volunteers stationed at vantage points around the neighborhood. Every angle emphasized the defiance, the synchronized lights, the enormous Santa on the roof, the twinkling reindeer in the front yard. Carol circled images with a red pen, marking infractions she believed justified immediate action. By noon, official correspondence was prepared. Letters were drafted citing multiple alleged violations: excessive brightness, unapproved structures, obstructing sidewalk pathways, and even distracting motorists. Every claim was carefully worded to sound authoritative while creating maximum pressure on Ethan. Legalese piled upon legalese, each sentence designed to intimidate rather than persuade. Ethan received the first wave by mid-afternoon. A thick envelope, marked Final Notice, Immediate Compliance Required, was taped to his front door. Inside, the letter warned of fines, legal action, and potential liens against the property. It concluded with a chilling line: Failure to comply will result in enforcement measures by the HOA and county authorities. For a moment, he considered backing down. The fines were already steep, and legal action could escalate into months of costly battles. But then he remembered why he had started this in the first place: the joy of the holidays, the memory of his father, and the principle that no organization could dictate how someone celebrated responsibly on private property. Instead of compliance, Ethan went on the offensive. He documented everything meticulously: photos of the display, a complete inventory of every light, every structure, and every power source. He measured distances to the sidewalk, verified brightness levels, and double-checked all electrical safety codes. Every fact confirmed that his display was fully legal, fully safe, and fully within his rights. The next step was strategic. He reached out to neighbors, both publicly and discreetly. Many had quietly admired his courage, but feared retaliation. Others had complaints of their own about petty fines, strict rules, or unwarranted inspections. Slowly, Ethan began forming a quiet alliance, a network of residents willing to support him, if not openly, at least morally. Meanwhile, the HOA escalated tactics. They began conducting daily patrols, photographing the lights at different times of night, noting any perceived offenses. Carol even approached some neighbors individually, attempting to rally support against Ethan, painting him as a reckless troublemaker and a danger to community standards. But the plan backfired. Instead of fear, the neighbors felt solidarity. Some even discreetly cheered Ethan on, hanging small lights or decorations on their own porches in subtle gestures of rebellion. It was small at first, almost imperceptible, a blink-and-you'll-miss-it alignment of Christmas spirit, but it grew into something unmistakable. The following weekend, Ethan unveiled the next phase of his Griswold mode strategy. Using his programmable controller, he synchronized the lights to music. Every night, the display played festive songs with perfectly timed flashes, creating a miniature light show that rivaled commercial displays. The energy was infectious. Children and adults alike stood on the sidewalks, clapping and gasping as the lights danced in unison. Social media caught wind of it quickly. Photos and videos circulated within hours. Local news stations even stopped by, capturing footage of the enormous Santa, dancing reindeer, and the roofline glittering like a beacon. Suddenly, Ethan's Christmas lights were no longer just a neighborhood spectacle. They were a viral story, the ultimate clash of holiday cheer against bureaucratic rigidity. Carol Benson was furious. The HOA was now under a new kind of scrutiny. Residents began questioning enforcement practices, comparing fines, and debating the limits of HOA authority. The pressure was mounting, and the board found themselves at an uncomfortable crossroads: continue to escalate, risking public backlash, or back down and preserve their reputation. In response, the HOA prepared what they considered a decisive measure. A formal notice of violation would be posted publicly in the neighborhood, along with a threat to involve county code enforcement if the lights were not removed immediately. They even scheduled a site visit, intending to have inspectors confirm that Ethan's display violated regulations. Ethan, however, was ready. He anticipated every potential maneuver. When the inspectors arrived, he had everything in order: a complete safety report, electrical certifications, and photographs proving that no laws or ordinances were being broken. The inspectors, bound by evidence, confirmed his compliance. No violation existed. By the end of the week, Ethan's lights had become a symbol, not just for Maple Crest Court, but for anyone who had ever been bullied by overzealous HOA rules. It was clear that Carol had underestimated the power of holiday joy, creativity, and community solidarity. But Carol was not one to accept defeat quietly. She began drafting a more aggressive response, one designed to strike at the very heart of Ethan's display. Threats of court action, citations for minor code infractions, and appeals to neighborhood sentiment were all prepared for delivery. The tension in the cul-de-sac escalated into what neighbors would later describe as a full-blown Christmas war. And all the while, Ethan worked quietly in the dark, planning his ultimate counterattack, a display so massive, so synchronized, and so public that it could not be ignored, shut down, or find a way. This would not be just lights, it would be a statement. A reminder that the spirit of Christmas could not be dictated by memos or bylaws. As the first snowflakes of December began falling, the neighborhood glimmered with anticipation. Some residents wondered if Ethan had gone too far. Others secretly hoped he would. Everyone, even Carol Benson, knew that this holiday season was about to become unforgettable. In his living room, surrounded by boxes of lights and cords, Ethan smiled at the challenge ahead. This was no longer a simple decoration dispute. This was war, and he intended to win. As December deepened, Ethan's plans began to take shape. He had dubbed his strategy Operation Griswold, a tribute to the legendary over-the-top holiday display of cinematic fame. But this was real life, and stakes were higher than any movie set. HOA fines, public scrutiny, and a neighborhood watching every move. Ethan needed precision, creativity, and a touch of audacity to pull this off. The first step was infrastructure. Ethan invested in professional-grade LED strips, waterproof connectors, heavy-duty extension cords, and a computerized controller capable of synchronizing hundreds of lights to music. He mapped every inch of his property, from roofline to garden, measuring spacing, angles, and line of sight from the street. Every roof pitch, every window frame, every tree became part of the canvas. Neighbors watched cautiously at first. Some expressed concern over power loads or potential fire hazards. Others whispered about the HOA letters piling up like a storm cloud over his driveway. But Ethan remained focused. Each evening, after work and putting the kids to bed, he climbed ladders and installed hardware, strung lights, and calibrated sequences. By the second week of December, the house had transformed into something almost surreal. Icicle lights traced the roofline, windows glimmered with synchronized LEDs, and a lawn featured an intricate grid of glowing reindeer, candy canes, and animated snowmen. Each display element had been programmed to blink, pulse, and flow in complex patterns. The display was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, the kind of spectacle that drew attention from passers-by and residents alike. But Ethan's true innovation was sound. He set up outdoor speakers, hidden in shrubbery, that played classic Christmas music perfectly synchronized to the light sequences. Carols like Jingle Bells and Carol of the Bells synchronized with flowing lights that danced across the facade. The effect was cinematic, the kind of holiday magic that made children gasp and adults stop mid-step to marvel. Word of the display spread quickly. Social media posts began circulating. A short video taken by a neighbor's child went viral on local Facebook groups. By nightfall, the cul-de-sac had become a destination. Cars lined the street, headlights reflecting off snow-dusted roofs. Neighbors chatted and shared hot cocoa, and children squealed with delight. The scene resembled a miniature festival rather than a private home. The HOA's reaction was predictable, swift, and furious. Carol Benson sent another letter, this time delivered personally by a board member in a crisp black SUV. The letter claimed that the synchronized lights were a public nuisance, that the music violated noise ordinances, and that all lighting must be removed immediately or legal action will follow. Ethan, however, anticipated this escalation. The timing was impeccable. He had researched local ordinances, confirmed decibel levels of the music, and documented every compliance measure. The HOA could threaten fines, but they could not enforce removal without legal grounds. Meanwhile, subtle shifts in the neighborhood were occurring. A few bold neighbors began adding minor decorations to their own homes, strings of white lights, small lit-up figurines, and candy cane stakes along the walkways. The movement was quiet but noticeable, signaling that Ethan was no longer alone in his defiance. A quiet camaraderie emerged, a shared acknowledgement that the HOA's rules were being challenged in the most festive way imaginable. Undeterred by the HOA letters, Ethan proceeded to expand the display. He added a giant 12-foot illuminated Santa on the roof, waving to passers-by, surrounded by synchronized reindeer whose legs moved in programmed loops. Inflatable snowmen and candy canes lined the walkway, and hidden lights beneath the snow created a sparkling, magical glow. The digital controller ensured that every element moved in perfect harmony, each sequence more elaborate than the last. Ethan even began experimenting with thematic variations for each night. One evening featured a classic Christmas theme with soft, warm whites. The next, a winter wonderland with blues and silvers, followed by a Santa's workshop sequence with animated elves moving across the roofline. The display was dynamic, evolving nightly, and impossible to ignore. The social impact was immediate. Videos of the lights went viral on Instagram, TikTok, and local news feeds. Journalists called for interviews. Neighbors posted glowing reviews, and the display became a symbol of defiance, creativity, and community joy. Ethan's Griswold mode had not only defied the HOA, but also captured the imagination of a wider audience. Carol Benson, however, refused to relent. She escalated further, drafting an official complaint with the county, citing alleged obstruction of sidewalks, electrical hazards, and public nuisance. Inspectors were scheduled to visit, intending to enforce compliance. The tension mounted as the inspectors approached. Ethan, ready for this inevitable confrontation, greeted the inspectors calmly. He presented diagrams, permits, electrical certifications, and safety inspections for every part of the display. Every element was in full compliance with local laws. The inspectors, bound by evidence and protocol, found no violations. The HOA's claims were effectively nullified. Neighbors celebrated quietly behind closed curtains, some leaving small gifts and notes of encouragement in Ethan's mailbox. The display had become more than lights. It had become a movement. It was rebellion wrapped in holiday cheer, a silent rebellion visible from every angle, sparkling in thousands of synchronized LEDs. As the nights went on, the battle lines became clearer. Ethan represented joy, creativity, and personal freedom. Carol Benson and the HOA represented control, order, and the enforcement of arbitrary rules. The cul-de-sac was divided, some fearful, others delighted, and many caught in between, watching a spectacle that had escalated from a single home to an entire neighborhood phenomenon. By mid-December, Ethan's display was no longer just about Christmas. It had become a statement about power, rules, and the courage to stand firm. With every sequence that danced in perfect time to music, he was sending a message. Joy cannot be fined, creativity cannot be banned, and the holiday spirit could not be dimmed. And as the snow began to fall, coating the neighborhood in pristine white, the lights twinkled brighter than ever, reflecting not just on windows and rooftops, but on the hearts of everyone who had watched and believed. Ethan knew the next steps would be critical. The HOA was unlikely to surrender quietly, and Carol Benson would stop at nothing to assert control. The coming days promised escalation, publicity, and, ultimately, a showdown that would determine the fate of Maple Crest Court's holiday tradition. For now, though, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The display was perfect, the neighborhood was buzzing, and Operation Griswold was officially in motion. The escalation did not end there. On Christmas Eve morning, another wave of HOA correspondence arrived at each participating home, demanding compliance, threatening fines, and warning of legal action. The tone was increasingly desperate, bordering on panicked. Carol herself visited some homes, hoping to dissuade residents through personal persuasion. She was met with polite but firm resistance. Many politely reminded her that no laws were being broken, that the displays complied with electrical and safety codes, and that the collective display was bringing joy, not harm. Ethan, witnessing all of this, realized the movement had grown beyond a simple light display. It had become a social experiment of sorts, demonstrating the power of community solidarity against arbitrary authority. Each light, each synchronized sequence, each supportive gesture was a tiny act of defiance, collectively transforming the cul-de-sac into a festive battleground. By the evening of Christmas Eve, the neighborhood looked like a holiday utopia. Every house along the street twinkled with lights, moving in rhythm, creating a mesmerizing display of colors, motion, and sound. Ethan stood in his front yard, observing the culmination of weeks of planning, labor, and quiet resistance. Children played in the glowing snow, families laughed and shared cocoa, and the neighborhood felt united in a way it hadn't in decades. Even the neutral observers, those who had not previously participated, were drawn in by the spectacle. Cars lined the street, and visitors from outside the neighborhood marveled at the display, taking photos and recording videos. The local news station returned, broadcasting the entire street live, showcasing the collective brilliance of a neighborhood's response to HOA overreach. Carol Benson, watching from her window across the street, understood she had lost control. The rebellion was complete. The community had found its voice, and no amount of intimidation could reverse the tide. She could issue fines, threats, and letters, but the damage to her authority was irreparable. Ethan, however, knew that the final confrontation was still ahead. While the neighborhood had rallied, and while the lights had gone viral, the official battle with the HOA had not ended. There would be legal maneuvers, more letters, and perhaps attempts to curtail the display through code enforcement. But for now, the neighborhood had taken a stand, and that victory, however temporary, was worth celebrating. As the night deepened and the synchronized lights reflected in the eyes of neighbors and passers-by, Ethan smiled quietly. Operation Griswold had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. He had ignited a movement, united a community, and created a spectacle that would be remembered for years. But deep down, he knew the war with the HOA was not over. The next steps would require careful planning, clever strategy, and unwavering resolve. And as the lights danced across the snow-dusted street, Ethan prepared for the ultimate showdown. By the 5th week of December, Maple Crest Court had become the epicenter of a holiday showdown unlike anything the neighborhood had ever seen. Ethan's display was no longer a simple house decoration. It was a full-blown attraction, a viral phenomenon, and a community rebellion wrapped into one dazzling spectacle. From the synchronized lights to the animated reindeer, every detail screamed defiance and creativity, and it drew attention from near and far. Carol Benson, however, refused to concede. The HOA board was frustrated, humiliated, and increasingly desperate. Every letter, every threat, every personal visit had been ignored or politely rebuffed. Worse, the neighborhood's collective defiance had grown into something unstoppable. Carol realized that her usual tactics, fines, letters, and personal intimidation, had lost their power. The display had become too public, too viral, and too beloved by the community to be silenced through bureaucracy alone. In response, the HOA escalated. They contacted the county's code enforcement office, claiming that Ethan's elaborate display posed electrical hazards, obstructed pedestrian pathways, and violated nuisance ordinances. Inspectors were scheduled to visit, armed with official forms, cameras, and a checklist of violations. Carol was determined to remove the display by legal force if she could not do it herself. Ethan, anticipating this, had already prepared. Every electrical connection, power line, and fixture had been inspected and documented. He had copies of permits, compliance certifications, and detailed notes demonstrating that nothing in the display violated any codes or laws. He knew that the HOA's case relied entirely on technicalities and intimidation, and he was ready to counter every claim with evidence. When the inspectors arrived, Ethan greeted them with calm professionalism. He guided them through the house and yard, showing how every electrical connection was grounded, every extension cord rated for outdoor use, and every sequence programmed to avoid excessive glare. The inspectors, after meticulous review, found no violations. The HOA's complaints were dismissed. The victory, however, was short-lived. Carol was not defeated by paperwork or inspections. She escalated again, this time attempting to involve the local media to portray Ethan as a neighborhood menace. She contacted a local news station, claiming that the lights were causing traffic hazards and sleep disturbances. She tried to frame the story as one of chaos and disorder, hoping to sway public opinion and pressure Ethan into compliance. Ethan, aware of the attempt, leveraged the situation to his advantage. He documented every supportive comment from neighbors, every child's delighted reaction, and every passing motorist stopping safely to admire the display. Social media posts, videos, and live streams painted a different picture entirely: a safe, joyful, and family-friendly spectacle. In effect, Ethan turned Carol's strategy against her, proving that the HOA's narrative of danger and nuisance was false. The tension in the neighborhood reached its peak on the night of December 22nd. A cold wind swept through Maple Crest Court, carrying the scent of fresh pine and the distant echo of carolers. Ethan's display, now fully synchronized with music and animated sequences, lit up the entire street. The lights reflected off the freshly fallen snow, creating an ethereal glow that bathed the neighborhood in warmth and color. Crowds of neighbors gathered, some standing on driveways, others leaning from windows. Children ran between houses, pointing and laughing, while adults sipped hot cocoa and marveled at the spectacle. For many, the display had become more than decorations. It was a statement of community unity and defiance against arbitrary authority. Carol, watching from her home, realized that her attempts to regain control were failing publicly. Her letters, threats, and legal maneuvers had not only failed to stop Ethan, they had inadvertently elevated him to local celebrity status. Every attempt to undermine him had backfired, drawing more attention to the display and inspiring greater community participation. Desperate, she attempted a final maneuver, threatening homeowners with personal fines for participating in the collective display. She sent letters stating that supporting Ethan's display would result in penalties under HOA rules. But the response was overwhelmingly defiant. Many residents ignored the threats, some even leaving small additions to the display as acts of solidarity. Anonymous gifts of lights, extension cords, and festive props appeared in front yards. By now, the movement had become self-sustaining. Ethan, while humbled by the support, knew the battle was not just about neighborhood politics anymore. It had become a test of endurance, creativity, and courage. The display required constant monitoring, maintenance, and adjustment. Lights burned out, sequences needed recalibration, and weather threatened to disrupt the setup. Yet Ethan persisted, motivated not just by defiance, but by the sheer joy his display brought to the community. The climax of the escalation arrived on December 23rd. Carol attempted to bring in a local inspector under the pretext of a final compliance check, hoping to intimidate Ethan into removing lights before the holiday. But the inspector, following all regulations, verified once again that everything was within legal limits. This left Carol with no immediate legal recourse. The neighborhood watched silently from the sidewalks and windows as the showdown reached its apex. Ethan, standing in the front yard, switched on a new sequence he had been testing for weeks. The lights surged in intensity, synchronized to a medley of classic carols. Santa's sleigh moved across the roofline, animated snowflakes cascaded from trees, and the synchronized reindeer pranced in precise choreography. The effect was breathtaking, almost surreal. For the residents of Maple Crest Court, this was more than a display. It was a victory over intimidation, a celebration of creativity, and a reminder that rules and authority could not suppress joy when a community stood together. Even those who had previously feared the HOA now watched in awe, some quietly cheering, others capturing the spectacle on their phones. Carol, finally realizing that the battle could not be won through threats or bureaucracy, retreated to strategize for the next move. Ethan, aware of the HOA's limitations, began planning the final phase of Operation Griswold, a climactic display timed for Christmas Eve that would guarantee national attention and cement his triumph. As the night deepened and the lights reflected off the snow and windows, Ethan felt a surge of satisfaction. The HOA had escalated, but he had met every challenge with preparation, creativity, and resilience. The neighborhood had united. The lights shone brighter than ever, and Operation Griswold was ready to reach its ultimate crescendo. The stage was set. The final showdown between holiday cheer and HOA control was imminent. Christmas Eve dawned crisp and clear, the streets of Maple Crest Court dusted with a delicate layer of snow that glimmered in the early morning sun. For weeks, Ethan had meticulously prepared every detail of his ultimate display. This was not merely a show of lights. It was the culmination of Operation Griswold, the final statement in a neighborhood battle that had captivated local media, social networks, and, most importantly, the community itself. By late afternoon, visitors began to arrive. Cars lined the cul-de-sac, horns honking in friendly greeting as neighbors, friends, and curious onlookers parked along the street. Cameras, both professional and handheld, were ready to capture the spectacle. Word had spread far beyond Maple Crest Court. Social media posts, viral videos, and news coverage had made Ethan's lights a must-see holiday destination. Ethan moved through his yard, checking each sequence, adjusting lights, and ensuring every electrical connection was secure. Every detail mattered. The synchronized animations had to function perfectly. Every reindeer must move in time. Every blinking sequence had to coincide with the music. He had spent weeks designing this display, calibrating the timing, and coordinating music tracks to produce a seamless spectacle. As dusk settled, the lights went live. The house erupted in a cascade of color and movement. Thousands of LEDs sparkled in perfect synchronization with a medley of carols, illuminating the cul-de-sac in vibrant reds, greens, golds, and blues. Santa's sleigh moved across the roofline as animated reindeer pranced across the lawn. Snowflakes flickered in delicate patterns, cascading over bushes and trees. The glow reflected off the snow-covered street, transforming the neighborhood into a magical winter wonderland. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Children ran between houses, pointing and laughing, their faces illuminated by the brilliant lights. Adults gathered on driveways, sipping hot cocoa and capturing photos and videos. Even passers-by who had never visited the neighborhood before stopped their cars, mesmerized by the scale and creativity of the display. The combination of movement, music, and color was nothing short of cinematic, a fully immersive experience. Local news crews arrived in force. Cameras captured sweeping shots of the entire cul-de-sac, from snow-dusted rooftops to synchronized lights across multiple yards. Interviews were conducted with neighbors who had contributed to the collective display. Every comment reinforced the story of community unity, creativity, and defiance in the face of arbitrary HOA enforcement. The narrative was clear. Maple Crest Court had transformed into a symbol of festive resistance. Carol Benson watched from her home across the street, a mixture of frustration and awe on her face. Despite months of warnings, letters, and legal threats, the HOA had failed to suppress the display. Her authority had been publicly undermined, and the spectacle had become a point of pride for the neighborhood rather than a source of shame. It was undeniable. The lights and the community's embrace of them had won. By nightfall, the viral impact was staggering. Social media posts exploded with video clips, hashtags, and live reactions. The story was shared nationwide, featured on local and regional news, and even picked up by national entertainment outlets. Ethan's operation, once a local defiance of HOA regulations, had become a cultural phenomenon. People admired the creativity, the meticulous execution, and the sheer audacity of transforming a neighborhood dispute into a joyous public celebration. Within the neighborhood, camaraderie reached a new height. Residents who had previously stayed neutral now actively participated, adding their own lights, decorations, and synchronized elements to the collective display. It was no longer just Ethan's house. It was a street's display, a collaborative masterpiece fueled by community pride and festive spirit. The culmination of Operation Griswold arrived at 10 p.m. Ethan initiated the final sequence, a full medley of Christmas classics, with every light, every reindeer, and every decorative element perfectly timed. The synchronized movements created the illusion of a living, breathing holiday village. Snowmen waved, Santa soared across the roof, and candy canes pulsed with radiant color. The effect was immersive, magical, and unforgettable. For Ethan, it was more than a personal victory. It was the vindication of principle, perseverance, and creativity. The weeks of letters, fines, threats, and inspections had tested his resolve, but he had met every challenge with preparation, cleverness, and unyielding determination. The neighborhood had rallied around him, turning a singular act of defiance into a collective celebration of joy, artistry, and resistance against unreasonable authority. Carol Benson's final attempt at intervention, contacting media outlets with claims of nuisance and hazard, had been neutralized by the overwhelming evidence of safety and compliance, as well as the community's vocal support. Her influence diminished. She was forced to acknowledge the outcomes silently, her authority eroded by the very residents she sought to control. As midnight approached, Ethan stepped back from the display, taking in the full scope of what had been achieved. The lights danced in harmony, music echoed through the cul-de-sac, and neighbors stood together, marveling at the spectacle. Children laughed, families shared stories, and strangers watched in awe. Maple Crest Court had become a landmark of creativity, defiance, and holiday spirit. For Ethan, the most rewarding moments were simple: the joy on the faces of children, the applause of neighbors, and the knowledge that he had preserved the essence of Christmas magic. Operation Griswold had transformed not just his house, but the entire neighborhood, and the story would be remembered for years to come. By the early hours of Christmas morning, the cul-de-sac was quiet. Snow covered the streets, the lights dimmed gradually, and the magic lingered in the air. Ethan knew that, for this season at least, the battle with the HOA had ended. The victory was complete. Maple Crest Court had been changed forever. One man's determination had united a community, created a viral sensation, and proven that the holiday spirit, when combined with creativity and courage, could overcome even the strictest rules. Ethan's lights, his perseverance, and the collective joy of his neighbors had turned an ordinary December into something extraordinary. The Christmas lights would shine again next year, bigger, brighter, and even more synchronized, a lasting testament to what could happen when joy refused to be suppressed. Ethan smiled, knowing that this was more than a holiday display. It was a triumph of spirit, ingenuity, and community. Operation Griswold had succeeded beyond imagination, leaving a legacy of light, laughter, and defiance for generations to come.